China's reporting of coronavirus to the World Health Organization and whether the nation has been truthful of the virus's impact has been a contentious issue amongst world leaders. China, where the virus originated, has said just 57 cases of COVID-19 per million. By comparison, Australia currently sits at 253 cases per million, while Spain has at least 3,700 cases per every million of population. I'm joined now by Australia's former High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, John Howards, former Minister for Foreign Affairs, and himself a former federal leader of the Liberal Party, the Honourable Alexander Downer, via Skype. Thank you very much for your time, Alexander. Terrific piece you've written. You said, you know, the world really has to be strong and stand up to China. You say the West has got to ram home that how they've behaved over this virus is unacceptable.
Yes, well, the first thing we want to do, there are many things we want to do, but the first thing we want to do once this virus subsides, I'm not sure whether it will be over anytime soon, but once it subsides, is find out how it happened and make sure that it doesn't happen again. Now, how are we going to do that? The reports are that it started in Wuhan, that some say it started in the wet markets there, some say it could have come out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. We just don't know. But I think what China owes to the world is an independent investigation into how this happened. They may be resistant. They may want to do the investigation on their own. This has had huge consequences for the world. Many have lost their lives. Economies have been devastated right around the world as a result of this. And China owes it to the world to allow there to be a strictly independent investigation. Of course, including the Chinese, they must be part of the investigation, but so too must Western and other countries be part of the investigation as well. We want to get to the bottom of how this happened.
If China won't cooperate, how credibly can we do an investigation from this distance?
Well, let's ask ourselves this question: why wouldn't they cooperate? They say they want to be cooperative. They say they want to share information. They're sending face masks and testing equipment, some of which apparently doesn't work, to other countries, and professing to be generous in their support, particularly to developing countries and countries hard hit like Italy and Spain. So if they want to be generous and they want to work with the international community and they want increasingly to be part of the mainstream of the international community, well, then on what basis would they not allow a proper expert investigation, an international investigation into what has happened here and how this catastrophe has spread upon the world? It would take a lot of explaining for them to come out and say to the rest of the world, we're going to ignore your concerns. It would take a lot of explaining.
All right, well, give me your sense of the veracity of China's infection numbers, its death rates, the fact that this disease within a matter of days has spread, you know, all corners of the globe. It doesn't appear to have hit Shanghai, their financial hub, nor Beijing, their power centre. How plausible is all of this?
It's hard to know, isn't it? I mean, and it's hard to know whether their figures are remotely accurate or whether they're not. From the experience of the rest of the world, we would assume their figures weren't very accurate. But one of the things they did, once they apparently decided to take any action at all, was to isolate Wuhan and stop any travel from Wuhan to other parts of China. Not, by the way, banning travel to other parts of the world from Wuhan. It didn't matter about the rest of the world, but stopping travel to other parts of China. It might have been the right thing to do that, but the wrong thing to allow travel to continue to go to other parts of the world and therefore for the virus to spread. But possibly, but who would know, their figures have some credibility, but we just don't know. This is the thing. Of course, I've dealt with China for many years. This is not a liberal democracy where claims made by politicians are tested. You just have to accept what they say on face value, apparently.
Well, talk to me about the World Health Organization. You've got more experience than almost anyone I can have on the show of these global bodies. There's been a lot of conjecture about the incumbent head, the connections of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative into projects in Ethiopia, the price that was paid in campaigning for the Ethiopian by the Chinese and the Communist Party from whence he came out of Ethiopia for him to get the job in the first place, this acquiescence, this campaigning for China, even after COVID-19 hit the globe, even after places like Australia closed their borders. You didn't have the World Health Organization even call it a pandemic for some time. Donald Trump's been pretty brutal overnight. He says we're going to freeze the money going into the World Health Organization. Australia is saying it won't. How would you deal with the World Health Organization going forward, and how should the West deal with them?
I mean, their performance has been messy, and they've been completely ineffectual. So has the United Nations more generally, because in the end, we've all had to depend on our national governments to take effective measures to deal with this. And the World Health Organization, they're meant to be the experts on these things, have in recent years been much more concerned about climate change and gender issues and, you know, the usual sort of agenda, the woke agenda, some people might say, rather than doing the sort of work they should have been doing on the possibility of a pandemic of this kind. So I would say they've performed pretty poorly, but it doesn't surprise me. And people get jobs in these organisations for all sorts of reasons. That is true of most multilateral institutions of this kind. So what I would do is I wouldn't, I'm with Scott Morrison, I wouldn't just cut off their funding brutally now. I would get together with other Western countries and try to start this amongst the Western countries and say to the World Health Organization, you need completely to revamp your operations from now onwards. I mean, for example, the World Health Organization came out a couple of days ago and said it was okay for China to continue with these wet markets. I mean, what are they saying? To what extent does the World Health Organization care about the devastation of this pandemic on the global economy and on people's lives? That they're saying, instead of saying we need what I've been arguing for, a full-blooded international investigation into what has happened here, they're saying let's reopen let's see the wet markets reopen again in China. Well, they've reversed their position 2 days later, I heard sometime today. So, I mean, the place is not being very well run, to say the least.
Hasn't this shown, Alexander Downer, though, the rise or restatement, I guess, of sovereignty? This has been really every country for itself trying to get PPE and ventilator equipment and to survive and close borders to beat the pandemic. Hasn't this been a real challenge to liberal globalism?
Well, what it is a reminder that the nation state is a fundamental part of our societies, the way we live, that we cannot survive outside of the nation state effectively when we are confronted with major challenges. These multilateral institutions are kind of all right when you're dealing with low-level issues, but when high-level issues confront the world, they're not much use. I mean, I've always been a believer basically in the nation state as the organising principle of international relations. And I know that's how international relations work. Some people dream of global governance and, you know, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all work together in organisations like the World Health Organization for a better world? Look, it sounds fine, it sounds compelling, but it just doesn't happen that way. It just doesn't happen that way. And this coronavirus crisis has reminded us of that point very clearly.